Should be good.
All right, greetings, folks. So glad to have you with us. I'm going to get us started here. I'd, I'll, I'm Amy Antonucci. I'm the New Hampshire Peace Action Board Chair, and I'm really glad to welcome you to our first program of 2025, our Peace and Justice Conversation Series online for Monday, January 13th. Tonight, we're bringing you lessons from the Nobel Peace Prize delegation with Joseph Gerson. Joseph is the president of the Campaign for Peace, Disarmament, and Common Security. We're especially grateful to him because we had scheduled Alicia Sanders-Zachary to talk about Israeli nuclear weapons. However, she is ill and had to cancel. We'll reschedule her soon. Meanwhile, we're really happy to have Joseph. Let's start with an acknowledgement that we are doing our work here in New Hampshire on Nidakina, the traditional ancestral homeland of the Abenaki, Wabanaki, and Pennacook peoples, past and present. We honor with gratitude the land, the waterways, and the people who have been in relationship throughout the generations. Real quick reminder on Zoom guidelines. We love when you keep your video on. We will keep your audio muted. You can use the chat for questions as soon as you want. Later, we will move to hand raising and I'll be calling on people. For over 40 years, New Hampshire Peace Action has been educating, mobilizing, and organizing to build a more peaceful and just future for all. This online conversation series began in 2020 as a way to stay connected and delve into how to better understand the world and change it. We are so pleased that it's been helpful for folks and that we are beginning another year of doing it. And as I said, tonight we're excited to welcome back Joseph Gerson. He's the president of Campaign for Peace, Disarmament, and Common Security, as well as the co-chair of the Committee for a Sane U.S.-China Policy, co-convener of the International Peace and Planet Network, and involved in many other organizations. His books include Empire and the Bomb, How the U.S. Uses Nuclear Weapons to Dominate the World, and The Deadly Connection, Nuclear War and U.S. Foreign Military Intervention. Joseph's research, his experiences, his longtime activism have made him an invaluable resource for so many of us. And a lot of us were following his trip to Oslo, Norway for the Nobel Peace Prize ceremony. And we're really excited for this opportunity to have him join us and tell us more. He will speak and then we will go to Q&A. So I'm going to turn it over to him and everyone give him a visible welcome.
So thank you, Amy. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. And let me embarrass you for a second by again congratulating you on being named this year's awardee of the Martin Luther King Day annual prize. So congratulations for that. It's also a pleasure to see a number of friends here online. I'd love to say hello to each of you, but just know that I see you and love to see you here. I also wanted to begin by saying a little bit of irony as I'm substituting for Alicia Sanders-Zachary. In not so ancient history, she was my intern at the American Friends Service Committee. And back then, I was hosting a delegation of Hibakusha, the A-bomb survivors, and other Japanese peace activists. And Alicia was involved in itinerating them. I'm remembering particularly her lining up and then escorting them to one of the public schools here in the Boston area. So just to note that, to appreciate just the ironies of how the circle closes. So I'm not exactly a technological genius, and so I'm going to try to get into the let's see if I can get this here. Get this into a slideshow. Don't want that. Okay. So I had been working on a kind of a
Joseph,
script. Yeah, can you? Yes.
we can see it, but we still see like the ones on the side. Is there a way to make it bigger so we really get the picture? Do
Let's
you
see
know?
if I can. Let me see what I can do.
I don't know how it looks for you, but just so you know.
I'm not sure I can do that. Let me see what I can
Okay.
do. I can't. So
Okay.
I
No worries.
apologize. I apologize.
It's okay.
There's certainly a way to do it, but I'm missing it now. So as I was saying, I had been preparing a slideshow and a script that was not quite complete when I got the invitation, and it seemed the best thing for me to do would be to finish that script and give as complete a presentation as I can. So I'll jump in here. Among the last things that I ever imagined was participating in the Nobel Peace Prize ceremony, in part because I was involved in nominating Nihon Hidankyo for the Peace Prize 4 times. That extraordinary privilege came to me when I was invited to join the delegation in Oslo to receive the world's most esteemed recognition and award. I will say that keeping my balance through it, knowing that I didn't never suffered anywhere near what the Hibakusha have, uh, uh, or done what they have done and had the kind of courage that they've had with their lives, kept me a little bit off balance throughout. Hidankyo is the Japan Confederation of ANH bomb sufferers organizations, and it's been my privilege to know, to work with, and tour many of Hidankyo's leaders and members since I first attended the World Conference Against ANH bombs in 1984, it was 40 years ago. That followed our nuclear weapons freeze campaign, in which a number of you on this webinar participated, and my role in leading the successful campaign to prevent President Reagan, Senator Kennedy, and the Boston elite from transforming Boston Harbor into a nuclear weapons base. Um, there it was. This is a photo of the delegation taken in the lobby of our hotel several hours before the award ceremony on December the 10th. I should add that even as we were in high spirits, we all knew that we would be returning to the dangerous and traumatized world of the Gaza and Ukraine wars, the 3 scorpions in a bottle of the US, Chinese, Russian nuclear arms race, the new Cold Wars, and the climate emergency, to say the least. Pictured here are Tanaka Terumi and Kodama Michiko. Tanaka-san is a Nagasaki Hibakusha who served as Hidankyo General Secretary for 20 years. And he is currently the senior co-chair of Hidankyo, and he served as the leading figure of the delegation. At age 92, in addition to his vision and courage, I was impressed by his patience and fortitude as he had to repeatedly recount his searing memories, the history of Hidankyo, its core message that human beings and nuclear weapons cannot coexist. More than 20 years ago, I hosted him on a speaking tour across New England. Central to that memory is our sitting together at a picnic table under pine trees between his talks at a Quaker meeting in Maine. There, under these pine trees and at the table, Tanaka asked me, "Who will remember us when we are gone?" That's a sobering question to be asked. As I said in Oslo, with the Nobel Peace Prize, we now have a good part of that answer. One result of that speaking tour was that the Vermont state legislature became the first in the nation to call for the complete abolition of nuclear weapons. Pictured with Tanaka-san is my dear friend Kodama Michiko, an assistant Hidankyo General Secretary. Over many years at the World Conference against ANH bombs and elsewhere, I've heard her share her descriptions of the A-bomb's devastation of her family, how she struggled with her decision about whether to bear children, given the possibility of genetic A-bomb damage, and then her daughter's death from cancer, all of which are just absolutely heartbreaking. Yet with extraordinary poise and commitment, she has spoken across Japan and in numerous international and UN formats.
Joseph,
Yes.
can I give you a message here that there should be a projector icon in the lower right that would get the slides to show full size? people would love to see them a little more closely.
Okay, doing what I can here. My problem, let me see if I can move my
Oh, was your cursor stuck?
I thought I saw it here. Hold on.
And to say lower right.
My problem is dealing with the with all of your pictures. I'm really sorry.
It's okay. It's
I'm really
okay. We
sorry.
just thought it was worth a try.
Yeah, it was worth a try. I'm sorry. Most people are unaware that many Koreans were killed, wounded, and poisoned by the A-bombs. Japan conquered and brutally colonized Korea beginning in 1905. For 40 years, thousands of Koreans were either taken to Japan as forced laborers or traveled there to find work, and many were killed or poisoned by the A-bombs. With the end of the war, in fact, which came more as a result of the Soviet Union announcing its entry into the war than the A-bombings, Japan's brutal colonization of Korea ended. To this day, many Koreans associate the A-bomb with their country's liberation, and as a result, returning Korean Hibakusha have been scorned, isolated, and denied medical care by the Korean, Japanese, and U.S. governments. On the right is Watanabe Junko. After the war, she and a number of Hibakusha fled to Brazil and other countries. She is standing here with Brazil's ambassador and is holding the photo of Morita Takashi, the late former president of the Hibakusha Association in Brazil. The invitation to join the Hidankyo delegation came with instructions to make reservations at Oslo's Grand Hotel. Grand indeed. It's 150 years old, is directly across from the Norwegian Parliament, and was once the haunt of Norway's most famous and notorious artist, Edvard Munch, and his fellow Bohemians. We were joined at the hotel by the Egyptian dictator Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, an entourage of wealthy Egyptian capitalists, and their very thuggish security agents. Sisi was the first Egyptian president to visit Norway and was there to negotiate trade agreements. Eager to ensure that nothing went wrong, Sisi and we were also cared for by a contingent of Norwegian police. I'll spare you my stories about being accompanied to a bathroom by an Egyptian security agent, how I almost bumped into an Egyptian general, and how Sisi's convoy almost delayed the award ceremony. Lessons in power politics. The Nobel Prize ceremony took place in the city's ornate city hall. Counterintuitively, it began with heralding military trumpets, which certainly got our attention. On the right, you see Norway's king, the queen, the crown prince, and the princess, who were just a few arms length away from me. There has recently been a scandal involving the princess's son by former marriage, which is leading to growing numbers of Norwegians questioning whether they really need a monarchy. Inspired music elevated the contextualized the ceremony. The small band on the left, led by the saxophonist and his operatic singing voice, took us immediately with its haunting tones to the suffering of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. My favorite anthem of the Japanese peace movement is Never Again the Atom Bomb, but this composition had equally resonating impacts. I associate the samisens on the right with Okinawa, but the sharp and striking sounds that these women created certainly brought Japan into the hall. Just down a little bit more. I'm sorry about my technological limitations. Please be patient with me. Please be patient with me with these next two slides. We all stood in honor as the delegation's leaders, and yes, royalty too, entered the hall. Certainly a high point was the introductory speech given by the Norwegian Nobel Committee's new and young chairman, Jorgen Watne Fridnes. Do yourself a favor and listen to and be inspired by his speech. No frills, he underlined the seriousness of the existential threat and today's increasing dangers of nuclear war by quoting from the 1955 Russell-Einstein Manifesto, and I'll quote it. They wrote, "There lies before us, if we choose, continual progress in happiness, knowledge, and wisdom. Shall we instead choose death because we cannot forget our quarrels? We appeal to human beings as human beings. Remember your humanity and forget the rest. If you can do so, the way lies open to a new paradise. If you cannot, there lies before you the risk of universal death, which is what we all face. I once toured Joseph Rotblat, the only senior Manhattan Project scientist to quit because of moral considerations. A friend of Bertie Russell's, he was actually the lead author of the manifesto. And there's a remarkable story, maybe we can do in the Q&A, about how Einstein signed it just before he died. Friedness referenced the end of the mostly peaceful European post-Cold War order bubble, the modernization and upgrading of the nuclear power's 12,000 nuclear weapons, and the dangers of proliferation. Modestly drawing on his own life's work in the aftermath of the 2011 Nazi terrorists in Norway that took the lives of more than 70 rising young labor leaders, he rooted his appreciation of the Hibakusha in their major contributions to creating the nuclear taboo out of their trauma, out of their excruciating traumas. He said, "You did not resign yourselves to victimhood. You defined yourselves as survivors. You refused to sit in silent terror as the great powers led us through long periods of nuclear armament. You shared your personal testimony with the entire world. A light in the darkest night, you give us hope." Friends, Friedness was amazing, and he was a source of hope himself. He concluded with the Nobel Committee's message to the world that the Hibakusha must not bear this responsibility alone. We all have a duty to fulfill the mission of the Hibakusha. Their moral compass is our inheritance. Tanaka-san always speaks with quiet dignity. 92 years old, it was extraordinary how he and other aged Hibakusha, who were also challenged by jet lag, were so fully present from morning into the night, always on message through press conferences, interviews, talks, photo ops, and finally the award ceremony. Tanaka-san's Nobel lecture was comprehensive and familiar to those of us who have worked with him. But as he touched on the traumatic memories and struggles of the Hibakusha, he misted more than a few of their eyes. He began with the origins of Hidankyo in 1956, after the silencing of the Hibakusha by the 7-year U.S. military occupation. We can talk more about that in the Q&A. He talked about the first decade of their suffering and isolation, the U.S. H-bomb test, which was 1,000 times more powerful than the Nagasaki A-bomb, was in Bikini, which in turn ignited the Japanese peace movement. Incidentally, just because I always like to bring it to mind, the emotional shock waves of that H-bomb test not only sparked the creation of the Japanese peace movement and the abolition movement, but it also led to the first Godzilla movie, which in its original cut was a cry of anger and warning about nuclear weapons. To get the original cut, which is not a love story, only partially so, you'll find it really quite interesting. Tanaka-san shared his own testimony of seeking out relatives, some of whom were dying, and others who had already been reduced to charred corpses. He briefly referenced cremating family members' remains with his own hands. And for those who did not know, Tanaka-san reminded the world that the two atomic bombs, which killed 210,000 people by year's end, and 400,000 injured and exposed to the radiation, who in many ways remain with us and are dying year by year. Tanaka-san was clear about Hidankyo's goals from the beginning. They were, quote, "The state which started and carried out the war should compensate the victims for the damage caused by the A-bombs, even as to this day the Japanese government resists with its insistence that, quote, the sacrifice of the war should be endured equally by the whole nation. Second, and still now, Hidankyo's demand is for, quote, the immediate abolition of nuclear weapons." He went off script when he repeated his criticisms of the Japanese government, which is its national security policy is dependent on the U.S. extended deterrence. To convey the urgency of the moment, as he did in his first press briefing in Oslo, Tanaka-san condemned the recent Russian nuclear threats. But as he asked us to try to imagine the 4,000 nuclear warheads, that are deployed and ready to be launched immediately, and which can inflict thousands of times more damage than Hiroshima and Nagasaki, he called out all of the nuclear powers as he decried deterrence theory and its role in preparing the world for annihilation. With a steady voice, he reminded us that the Hibakusha will not long be with us, and closed with the appeal that people in countries around the world, quote, listen to the testimonies of A-bomb survivors and feel, with deep sensitivity, the true inhumanity of nuclear weapons, and join in the belief that nuclear weapons cannot and must not coexist with humanity, and to work for a world free of nuclear weapons. In the evening came the black tie banquet that I'd been told I had to attend. I had to wear a second-hand tux for the third time in my life. Lonnie, my wife, was shoehorned into the event at the last minute and was seated with one of the Crown Prince's 3 primary aides. With a view of the whole assembly, he also had security responsibilities. I was fortunate to sit between and learn from Thea Olstead Olsen of the Nobel Center and Norway's IPPNW director. Other tables were populated, quite separately, by Norway's political, economic, and social elite, including one table that we were told included the country's leading fascists. The food was excellent, complemented by 5 different courses of wine. We suspected that the final parliamentary speaker of the evening, who rattled on incoherently, may have had a little more than his share of the libations. While he was speaking, I experienced both empathy and self-contained laugh. At the table next to us, jet-lagged Hibakusha had fallen asleep while the politician droned on. Yeah. Ingeborg Brynäs, the former president of the International Peace Bureau, organized an exchange meeting for Hibakusha and Japanese and Norwegian peace activists. You'll note from the T-shirt worn by Hidankyo's official photographer that concern about the genocide in Gaza accompanied the delegation. Also worth noting was that besides the massive Japanese media presence, there was a related group of Japanese who accompanied the official delegation. More than a few were second and third generation Hibakusha who are organizing to carry on into the future. And as Norwegians spoke about their opposition to NATO and the region's increasingly dangerous military preparations, which is not unrelated to Trump's imperial ambitions for Greenland, I wonder if it might be time to revive what we had as the North Atlantic Network in the 1980s. I was anything but the center of attention, but I was asked to speak at a smallish and somewhat international rally outside Oslo City Hall. The text of that talk was published by Common Dreams and by Mass Peace Action in order to amplify the award and Hidankyo's urgent warning. A very special moment for me came after the official award ceremony when we gathered for a rally outside the Norwegian Parliament. I was asked to give an impromptu speech to the Hidankyo delegation, and that provided me with an opportunity to thank them for inviting me to join the delegation, for all that they have done and given to me over the years, to publicly acknowledge and thank friends and mentors, and to recall some of Hidankyo's courageous founders who did not live to be part of the Nobel Prize affirmation. I have to say that I really missed some of these extraordinarily courageous people who suffer to the furthest end of what humans can endure, or maybe not endure, and who went on to co-found and in many ways lead Hidankyo, and even to speak at the United Nations, at least one of whom had wounds that never closed. Missed them terribly. This is the Nobel Peace Center, where we joined in the formal opening of the Nihon Hidankyo exhibit. I was struck by the Martin Luther King quotation on the window to the right. Quote, "We must learn to live together as brothers, or we will perish as fools." That immediately brought Gaza, Ukraine, Sudan, and our political traumas here in the US to mind. There was just a little time for sightseeing. This uncharacteristically sweet Munch painting is at the National Museum, but the museum also includes searing art from the 1970s that screamed in protest against the US murder of millions in Vietnam. The photo on the right comes from an afternoon aquatic tour of the Oslo fjord. If you look carefully, you'll see that someone is water skiing in December. The winter scene in Oslo's shopping district and the Christmas market just across the street from our hotel. At other times, the image displayed at the center of the Ferris wheel was a Japanese peace crane. The city itself was celebrating Hidankyo's Peace Prize. Yeah. This tunnel of golden lights was adjacent to the Christmas market and was stunning in the dark of Oslo's winter nights, which began at 3:30 in the afternoon after 5 to 6 hours of daylight. The photo on the right, which features Coca-Cola, is also from the Christmas market and speaks for itself. I said we were just across from the Parliament, and in the plaza in front of it, there were a series of small and somewhat larger protests and rallies. This one is of Ukrainians who live in Norway and were justifiably furious. Other rallies included this one by Syrians celebrating Assad's overthrow and the end of his torturing dictatorship. They were so excited that initially they had their flag upside down. There were larger demonstrations against the genocide in Gaza and another one by right-wing Vietnamese protesting the government in Hanoi. Here are a couple of immodest self-portraits. Each delegate was given an opportunity to pose with the Peace Prize and the award certificate. On the right, I'm chatting with Carl Hendrik Helden, the former chair of the Nobel Committee. He expressed his sympathy for what we in the US are going to have to endure with the coming of the Trump years. Sunsets over the Oslo fjord come early in the winter, but maybe that makes them more beautiful. I'm going to go on for a little bit with just this one slide here. Even if it was only for a few days, it was liberating to be outside the US and in a social democracy. In Oslo, people we met with were universally less stressed than people in the US, knowing that they were relatively economically and socially secure, not feeling endangered by direct assaults on democratic culture, and not caught up in trying and failing to rule the world. Let me then conclude with several lessons. First and foremost, human beings and nuclear weapons cannot long coexist. Then, in his 1937 anti-fascist novel, Ignazio Soloni wrote, and I'll quote, "In the land of propaganda, any little man, who goes on thinking with his own head, imperils the public order. Tons of printed paper repeat the government slogans. Thousands of loudspeakers, hundreds of thousands of manifestos and leaflets, legions of orators in the squares and crossroads, thousands of priests from the pulpits repeat these slogans ad nauseum to the point of collective stupefaction. But it is enough," he wrote, "for one little man to say no, murmur no in his neighbor's ear, or write no on the wall at night, and public order is endangered." The Hibakusha of Nihon Hidankyo, these Nobel laureates, are ordinary people, so-called little women and men, postmen, machine operators, students, teachers, who with their courage and steadfastness have shaken the world. They offer us vision, hope, and courage which can and should be our own. It was, quote, little women and men who launched the civil rights and freeze movements, and it will be ordinary people like ourselves who will create the way through the coming Trump MAGA period, and who can lead the way for nuclear disarmament, democracy, and to stanch the climate emergency. Then, even as we must live and act with a sense of urgency, we must also proceed with patience and hope. Exceptionally tortured and courageous Hibakusha, including Senji Yamaguchi, Chieko Watanabe, Sumitaro Taniguchi, played essential roles in founding and leading Nihon Hidankyo. They did not live long enough to experience the recognition of their sacrifices and warnings, which are now embraced and echoed by the Nobel Committee. But they created the foundations that made it possible for their comrades to sound their warning and offer their hope to people across the world, including those who exercise state power. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke of reaching the mountaintop and seeing the promised land. He said that he might not, and in fact he didn't, live to get there. But he and so many others won the institutional changes that have given rights and opportunities to millions of others. The same applies to us. We can read in the Talmud that you are not expected to complete the task, but neither are you permitted to lay it down. Coming to my conclusion here. Abolition must remain our goal, and the Back from the Brink campaign, I think, is our best vehicle. But to prevent nuclear war and to build the trust needed for abolition, some diplomatic arms control steps should and can be embraced and supported. Even with its limitations, one way to restore strategic stability and to advance arms control diplomacy would be for the U.S. to join China in its no first use doctrine. That is one of the planks of the Back from the Brink campaign. Yes, try it one more time. Yes, unilateralist militarists will drive much of the Trump agenda, but it is possible that Trump's transactional way of being could create openings for no first use and more in the course of his confrontations and negotiations with China, and we should be prepared for that. Central to what the Hibakusha and now the Nobel Committee have done has been to insist on the correlation between memory and human survival. Orwell and Kurt Vonnegut did the same. As we are pushed ever deeper into MAGA memory holes and the rewriting of history, democracy and species survival will depend on our learning and knowing our histories. Just to note that this August will be the 80th anniversary of the A bombings. It will be perhaps the last great opportunity that the Hibakusha have to share their experiences, their suffering, and to make their call for complete abolition. I think we should be all prepared to do what we can to help them. A final note is to appreciate the value and possibilities. I think I already did this one, so we'll forget that. So I'll just close here and encourage you, if you've had a chance, to take a look at the URL there on the right. Listening to the speeches, which are recorded and on the Nobel Prize, Nobel Center's webpage, would be a gift to yourself. So thank you for your patience, and I hope you found this helpful. And I can get out of here eventually.
Thank you so much, Joseph. Nice to hear the story of your trip. I'm going to let folks know that you can use both the chat or the hand raise function in order to ask a question. We do allow, sometimes the questions are a little more statements, and we can handle a little bit of that, but it is great if you can actually ask a question. Let me see. Well, I'm going to ask one. I was wondering if you could say a little bit about the doomsday clock, where it's at and why.
Yeah. So, in the early 50s, I think it was 1953, a number of the atomic scientists who had been involved in creating the nuclear weapons, the A-bombs, created the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. And one of their vehicles for warning the world and trying to push for action for disarmament and abolition was to create a doomsday clock. The idea that the hands is the furthest away from midnight that the hands were, the safer we were. And the closer to midnight, the more urgent the situation. Now, for the last 2.5 years, the hands have been at 90 seconds to midnight. That's the closest they've been since 1953. That should be a profound warning to us. And the resetting of the clock, I think, comes maybe at the end of January. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. Given the global situation here, I would not be surprised if they moved it even still a little bit closer to midnight.
Thank you. All right, we have some hands up. I'm going to start with Chris. Chris, I'm going to let you unmute and ask your question. There you go.
Thank you, and welcome, Joseph. And I'm wondering, what is the most surprising thing that you encountered or that you heard?
Most surprising. That's a good question. Well, I think most surprising was having to share the hotel with an Egyptian dictator. That's outside of my experience. I think the speech by the young chair of the Nobel Committee, it was just extraordinary, and I would just commend it to everyone. And not only was it the quality of the talk, but also say his age. Friedness is, I think, just a little bit over 40. He's my son's age, maybe even a little bit younger. And you could not but feel real hope, but also just knowing a little bit more of his story, just to have the greatest respect for who this man is, his character, and to hope that he has many more years of contributions to make. The other thing, which I don't know if it came through loudly enough in my talk, I've had the extraordinary good fortune to work with a number of the leading figures and others of Hidankyo. I mean, people who have suffered so much. I've watched them give their speeches. I've drunk beer with them. I've laughed with them, cried with them. And to be there to witness they're receiving this most extraordinary honor, and to have this platform out into the world, I mean, it was just beyond heartwarming. I mean, it was just a wonderful, I was just thrilled for them. It was just great.
All right, great. We've got Louise next, and Louise, see if you kind of unmute now. There you go.
Very great. Oh, thank you. I am so happy to see Joseph's narrative, and that I thought that he did really well in terms of explaining and getting the points across. I was wondering, are you going to be doing other talks, other places about your trip? I would love to help promote that.
Well, thank you. I mean, just to self-advertising here, I've got a couple of other talks, but not about the Nobel Prize. But I depend on people's invitations and your organizing, and with the modest goal, to make any contributions to help people with organizing and advocacy.
Great. Thanks.
All right, and Abby is next.
Hi, Joe.
Hey, Abby, good to see you.
Nice to see you. You made a comment which I was struck by, about there was a table of fascists in the room. What is the significance of that? Were they there to celebrate the Peace Prize, and how did the group include them?
Well, the dinner was really quite remarkable. I mean, it was presided over by the Crown Prince. It was a gathering of the Norwegian elite. The Peace Prize is the one Nobel Prize given from Norway. The rest are given from Sweden. And so it's also, a major social and political event. So, as I said, in the room, there were all kinds of political leaders, economic leaders, cultural leaders. I mean, it was, I don't usually hobnob in that circle. And sitting next to my wife was the husband of a social democratic member of parliament, and he pointed over and particularly to this one woman at the table pretty close to ours. And he said, "Well, she's the leading figure in the fascist movement in the country. She's the figurehead. She's the Marie Le Pen of Norwegian fascism." I mean, look, I mean, Norway is a quote unquote advanced country, but you go back to the Second World War, right? And significant sectors of the Norwegian elite were quite happy to click their heels and bow to Hitler and the Nazis. And this included a man named Quisling, from whom we get that name. So, I mean, I celebrated, the Norwegian welfare state. But any place that you've got very wealthy people, any place that you've got racist people, you're going to have some forms of fascism or worse. Sorry to say that.
Thanks, Joseph. Jim, see if you can unmute. Working?
There you go.
There you go.
Hey, Joseph. Good there.
Hey, Tim, it's good to see you.
Here's a question I wanted to ask you. With the Hibakusha transitioning off the scene, what could you detect of their views about the rising young generation in Japan? And could you also talk about what you see in that generation in Japan and the generations in the US of young?
Good. So Tanaka-san, in his speech, made reference to the young Japanese who are taking up the testimonies of the Hibakusha and trying to keep those memories and those warnings alive. I will say that we have illusions about what Japan is. The Constitution basically says that they won't have a military. But the reality is that they're the number 5 or 6 biggest military spender in the world. And there are forces, maybe how many years, 30 years ago or so, I interviewed the man who was the principal author of Japan's military doctrine. And he told me then, this was 1996, he said that the Japanese military believes that the Constitution allows it to possess tactical nuclear weapons, which is, say, a Hiroshima-sized A-bomb, but it was simply a right that they had yet to decide to implement. The movement in Japan has played a really critical role in keeping Japan from becoming a nuclear weapons state. Campaigns, signature campaigns, and others win the majority of the country's governors, even conservatives. And the movement is very, very important in trying to limit militarism, which is now rising in Japan in response to China and pressures from the United States. So it's critical. I don't have enough experience to be able to talk about the rising generation in Japan, as a class of people. I think the country is more conservative than most of us want to think. But within Gensukyo, which is the leading Japanese peace organization, you do have some really wonderful and brilliant and dedicated young people. And there were some young people who came either as part of the delegation or actually as interpreters. So an inadequate response, but partial.
Thanks. I'm actually going to ask a couple from the chat that have been there a while, and then we'll get back to calling on people to ask their own. But I want to put this one out to you. Do you think Trump will have any interest in nuclear disarmament? negotiations of some kind, maybe try to get a Nobel Peace Prize for some sort of move in that direction?
So first of all, I've been involved in a track 2 discussion that I can't say much about. In the tradition of Sesame Street, like which one of these is not the same? It's me. It's former and current arms control diplomats, some generals, and senior analysts. And one of the things that came through from some of the Americans in one of the sessions was how driven Trump is to get a Nobel Peace Prize. We may think of that as ridiculous, but reality is what it is. I had a conversation the other day with Michael Christ of IPPNW. We were talking, as I made reference to in my talk, about no first use doctrine. We're going to head into a really nasty period of confrontation with China. We'll see it in the form of the economic confrontation, the tariffs and those negotiations. But also, the military will be on both sides, will be confronting one another. I mean, too much of our peace movement, I think, has remained ignorant of the degree of military operations, confrontations, and immediate dangers of the operations around Taiwan and in the South China Sea. So how quickly Trump will move to actually having some exchanges with the Chinese is not clear. But it was interesting. Chris was suggesting that given Trump's transactional nature, the idea of some form of agreement with China is not out of the realm of possibility. Add to that his hope for a Nobel Peace Prize. I will say, having been in Oslo and knowing what Trump is planning to do domestically from day one, it's hard to imagine the Nobel Committee giving it to them. I think there's still some embarrassment about Kissinger. So who knows? But I do think that I think our movement as we go forward has to keep our eyes very wide open. There's a lot that we're going to have to protest. There are a lot of people who are going to get hurt that we have to try to help. Some of us may be hurt, and we have to have solidarity. But we may also find unexpected openings, and we need to prepare to find a way to advance openings that are consistent with our values.
Thanks. That is fascinating. I'm going to take one here. Walt has had a hand up for a while. Walt, is that allowing you to unmute?
Thank you. I will ask a quick question. I'm a peace activist, human rights activist, have walked all over the world with groups and alone, including with the Japanese Buddhist order, Nippon Zammyo Hoji, and I have walked Japan also, to Hiroshima and Nagasaki too. You consider the Nobel Prize such an honor. I think if it was given to Tolstoy and Gandhi, they would have refused it. So I'm asking how the people in Norway feel about this prize. And then also Norway is one of the first to start NATO. So how the people in Norway feel about NATO now also? Thank you.
Okay, a good question. And clearly the Nobel Peace Prize has been contaminated over the years, with the decisions to give it to people like Kissinger. There's no question about that. And it's I think in some ways is reflects contest within the Norwegian political elite as to which way they're going to lead. But for the most part, it's been pretty good. And I don't think there's any question that it's the world's most important peace prize. I will say, I work with the American Friends Service Committee, as did Arnie Alpert, who's on the call here, for many years. The AFSC got the Nobel Peace Prize in 1947, actually, the politics of it were interesting, as that in the Nobel Committee's discussions, they had agreed that they would give the Peace Prize to AFSC that year, and they would give it to Gandhi the next year. But Gandhi was assassinated before he could get the prize. So it's worth just a little detail of history. Yes, Norway is a member of NATO. It is a state, and not the most militarist of them. But I think one of the things that, again, our movement needs to awaken itself to is the struggle for power in the far north. With climate change and global warming, the Arctic Ocean is increasingly becoming a both economic and militarily strategic prize. The Russian nuclear fleet, for example, is based on the Arctic Ocean. Across much of Europe, but not all of Europe, there's great shock with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Norway borders on Russia. It's long had a number of U.S. and NATO military bases there, and while the culture, as opposed to the state, the culture has been largely anti-militarist. What people told me was that they are feeling a rise in militarist culture and political forces within Norway, as now you've got Finland and Sweden in NATO, and you have many more military exercises and mobilizations. So there's a real concern about this. I don't think we should have romantic notions about very much in the world. Certainly not about Norway, but we have to do what we can do to prevent disasters.
Thanks, Joseph. Arnie and Judy, I'm going to call on you, see if there you go.
Yeah, so I'm going to violate Amy's rule and make a statement instead of asking a question. And just to note Joseph's humility in this discussion and deference to the survivors of the atomic bombings, to note that Joseph has been an invaluable organizer, educator, researcher in the field of nuclear weapons abolition for 4 decades and more, that he travels pretty much unceasingly, that he operates as a scholar of history in the quasi-diplomatic circles that he's mentioned, but that Joseph has never forgotten his own roots as a grassroots peace activist and organizer, and continues to, again, be unusual for somebody who operates at that level, but who is always thinking about what are the actions that we can take in our own lives and in our own communities to bring about change in the world. So I want to thank you, Joseph, and note that this is an award. While you didn't bring home the little medal, you are the fact that they recognized you as part of what was necessary here to recognize at this moment is important. And that my message for everybody else here is that in addition to your ongoing support for New Hampshire Peace Action, through participation, through doing what all those things Amy asked you to do them, and sending them money when they ask for it, to also be signing up to get alerts from Joseph's organization, the Campaign for Peace, Disarmament, and Common Security, and to send them some money too when they ask. So that's if I can raise my voice at the end and say, does everyone agree?
Arnie, let me say, if I need an agent, I know where to go. If you want another career, you could be my agent. But only to say, oh my God. But thank you for that. And only to say that, Arnie is a dear friend and a colleague of 40 years. And I think many people on this call will know that Arnie and in different ways Judy have been there where it's needed with both the intelligence and organizing ability for many years.
And that was well worth the statement instead of the question, Arnie. And it did prompt me to put into the chat the website for Joseph's organization and also one for where his writings go, and then the Back from the Brink group that he mentioned. So listen, I'm gonna have to close it, but Joseph told me earlier that he'd be willing to stay a few minutes late to get to the questions that we didn't quite make it. So like if Peter and others who put them in the chat can hang on, we always like to close officially at the hour, so everyone, you know, feels they can leave if they need to. But yeah, you're still good with that, Joseph, staying a few minutes?
Yeah, absolutely, sure.
Okay, all right. So let me tell you all a few things and put a few more things in the chat. It's a bunch of them. So let me say, we would love for you to stay in touch with us at New Hampshire Peace Action, nhpeaceaction.org. We're also on Facebook, and you can learn more about what we're working on and what programming we have coming up. And there is a lot coming up. Here's a few things. Our Ceasefire Now vigils continue. Wednesday, January 15th, 2 to 3 p.m. will be at Representative Pappas's office, 660 Central Ave in Dover, New Hampshire. Thursday, January 16th, from noon to 1, vigilers will be at City Plaza, Concord, New Hampshire. This Wednesday, January 15 at 7 p.m., the New Hampshire Peace Action book study is going to begin. This is part of our commitment to further education about effective nonviolence. And we're really excited to host this series. The book is Nonviolence, 25 Lessons from the History of a Dangerous Idea by Kurlansky. It will be a small group experience and led by a few NHPA members, and we still have room, so we'd love for a few more folks to sign up. There are a number of events coming up connected both to the presidential inauguration and/or Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Let's tell you about a couple of them. Saturday, January 18th at 1:30 p.m., we are co-sponsoring and speaking at the Seacoast People's March, South Church, 292 State Street, Portsmouth, New Hampshire. On Sunday, January 19 at 6:30 p.m. on Zoom, we will show the film, The Movement and the Madman, which we feel is apropos here, looks at how anti-war protests stopped President Nixon from a massive escalation of the US war in Vietnam. And the showing is actually in preparation for a panel discussion a few days later, January 22nd, 7 p.m. on Zoom with the director, the producer, and activist David Hartsoe.
Amy, let me just interject before people leave, if I can. I want to follow up with what Arnie was saying a little bit. Simply to say that I was born in 1946 in the immediate aftermath of the Second World War and the Judeo-side in Europe. And I was taught that there are three lessons from that, at least three. Never again to anybody, never to turn your head away from injustice and participate in the crime of silence, and that there's an absolute relationship between the truth and who lives and who dies and how. And you know, some of you, I mean, I've been very fortunate. I've been extremely fortunate. I mean, I took some risks. I don't have a lot of money, but I've lived an extraordinary life. If you go to Berlin, next to the U.S. Embassy near the Brandenburg Gate is the Holocaust Memorial, and you can walk into it, and you're no longer seen. You can see out, but people don't see you. And it talks about, if you will, ultimately the horrors that are right there in front of us, and implicitly, you know, the need for us to respond. So, you know, I think the people on this call, you're all here because you have deep commitments to justice and to peace. And the more that we can help people understand that they need to live through their values, I think the better we are. So I just wanted to give a better response to Arnie on that.
Thanks, Joseph. That's beautiful. And hard to follow up, but let me say a few more things. Which actually, Monday, January 20th, beginning at noon, there's going to be a Martin Luther King Jr. community celebration in Manchester, New Hampshire. And the theme is Many Paths, One Dream, Intersectional Perspectives on Martin Luther King's Legacy. New Hampshire Peace Action will be one of the honorees this year. And we'll be doing that, I think, trying to inspire people to live and stand up for important issues. And lastly, I will mention that our next Peace and Justice conversation will be a New Hampshire Peace Action update and feedback session on Monday, January 27th, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, Zoom. I'll put into the chat how to donate to the group. This is free, but we always welcome your donations. And then let me just say, before we turn off the recording and go to a little more conversation, that I'm so pleased. We're so glad to have you, Joseph, in our community doing this amazing work, and so many of you here. I mean, it's one of these times when we're facing a lot, and looking around us and seeing the amazing people that we're with who have been working so hard for so long is heartening. So I want all of you to find a way to say thank you here to Joseph and the many people who have been working, and never give up.
Including Amy and Doreen.
Sure, we'll take it, right, Doreen? And now Doreen's going to turn off the recording.